There we go.
Okay, thank you. Now that I've rehearsed my opening segment here for Inside Fairfield, I don't know how much was able to be heard, maybe nothing at all. But anyway, welcome this evening to this edition of Inside Fairfield, the broadcast that we do live from City Hall once a month before the first council meeting. And we try to go in depth a little bit on some of the city issues that are either impacted by the tax dollars that we spend or issues that we're going into. So I've invited this evening two sets of guests. One will be two members of the Convention and Visitors Bureau, Dave Neff and Tom Thompson. Tom is former city councilman. Dave has been chair of our Tree Enhancement Committee for 9 years, both very, very active in city business and community affairs, and we're very fortunate to have those two representing us on the Convention and Visitors Bureau. We are very curious to know what stage we are with the executive recruitment process for a director and also some of your future plans. So I think I'll just open it up, Dave, and maybe ask you as chair of the committee to give us an update on where we are with our executive director search.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks for the invitation. At this point, we started our whole process, I guess, when we first began our organizational meetings back in November, December, and went through the idea of putting a mission statement and bylaws, and so we have done some significant recruitment. We had 12 very good resumes that were presented to the committee, and Tom is on the search committee, so I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about it. And we have moved forward and had some local interviews here, but we're at the juncture where we're going to be making some good decisions for the community here very, very shortly. So I'd like to pass this to Tom, since he's worked more directly with it than I have, and then I'll come back and tell you a little bit about the future and where we're going from there.
Okay, thanks, Dave. As Dave mentioned earlier, we have had 12 people. I admit I don't know how many resumes we actually received. It was much more than that, but we narrowed it down to roughly the 12. And out of that, we've had 4 of those visit the community. They've come from various places in the country, the East Coast and the West Coast. We had extended an offer to one that we thought was, and we were fairly certain that we were going to actually land a director at that time. And just at the first part of last week, he backed out. He found another job closer to where his current place of residence is. So we have a meeting scheduled for Wednesday at noon. We've been meeting quite regularly over the last about 6-7 months. And to review the process again, we're not sure if we want to go back. Well, we haven't decided yet if we're going to go back in and actually open it up to those 12, if we're going to resubmit and ask for new resumes, type thing. But you know, we are getting the kind of resumes for the kind of people we've decided, the kind of people that we think we would like. It's just actually getting someone here that we feel will do the job and you know, wants to come to Fairfield. So, like I say, we will be doing that though this next Wednesday and getting more resumes in and hopefully narrowing down that process.
We feel very fortunate with the quality of applicants that we had. Some of them have been at some very high-level locations. Our top candidate, as Tom said, opted out this last week, but we were just astonished at the background that these people have, and they're willing to come to Fairfield because, in this instance, they have a 23-month-old daughter. Quality of life is what they're looking for. They don't want to be in the large metropolitan areas where they want to raise a family in a warm, loving community and a place where you can say it's the streetlights come on, it's time to come home. Don't have to worry about where the kids are all the time. Going forward, probably our biggest, besides the candidacy that we have going forward, is this weekend, of course, the Sesquicentennial State Fair. We are members of the Eastern Iowa Visitors and Convention, CVB, and Tom and Phyllis and Brendan Narducci, who's my vice chair, and myself will be in Des Moines at the Eastern Iowa Tourism booth all day Sunday. Brenda and I will start out the program from 9 until 3, and we'll be manning it with 2 people from another county. And then in the afternoon, Tom and Phyllis come in from 3 till 9, and I think it's Fayette County is who will be the 2 people that will be there. And so it gives us an opportunity to provide more exposure for Fairfield, especially Eastern Iowa, but while we're there, that's our promotion time. The opportunities that we see are to hand out copies. In fact, I saw on the back of Tom's vehicle and the back of mine, and from the Fairfield Ledger, and some of the neat things that have happened in the handout. And then this last week we sat down, did some brainstorming, and tried to come up with the top 10 reasons why people should visit Fairfield. These were just our own decisions within the CVB board, and Brendan Narducci was back today out taking pictures on a beautiful, as they'd call it, Chamber of Commerce Day for Fairfield, of our top 10, and we're going to put those into a 3-fold brochure, and we'll have those to hand out along with Eastern Iowa, the piece from the Ledger, and then our own brand new, freshly created informational sheet about Fairfield, Iowa.
Right. Well, I don't think you'll be telling any lies in that literature, so I think there really is a lot that we have to offer here. You know, this has been a year also where we've seen a lot of the events that we know we're going to be able to promote and that will be attractive to people to come and visit, the art walks, some of the summer concerts, and some of the opportunities for conventions in this city. I think they've really taken a step up, upgraded themselves in the quality of what they offer people. I know this past art walk there were many people from out of town who've been to several now, and they continue to bring people back. The opportunity, I think, is going to be great for someone. What kind of feedback have you been getting from some of the candidates that you've had for the potential in our community for really attracting many tourists?
I think the biggest thing that we hear from these candidates coming from the west and east is that they can't believe the energy, the excitement that Fairfield seems to have at this juncture. The candidates we did have in, we did schedule on First Friday Art Walk so they could see all the vibrance and the excitement around the town square, and both were the people were just very, very impressed with this level of energy that they just don't expect to see when they come to a smaller county seat community. I think the opportunities that candidates have expressed to us are the fact that we are almost a halfway spot between Kansas City and Chicago. We're a halfway spot between St. Louis and Minneapolis. And so as there are events that may be drawn to larger communities, there's an opportunity for us to draw from larger communities to come to our Fairfield area. The same way as we even talk about the Civic Center and the theater opportunities, as traveling companies are going from one large metropolitan area to the other, that it's a halfway stop that we could catch them on a Tuesday or Wednesday night where they're going between a Friday, Saturday, Sunday performance, and we could catch them for maybe a half price. And so those are things that have been brought up in the discussion, that our location is excellent. I think the other thing that we have talked about is the just being a hub for southeastern Iowa. Many of the other locations have only a theater or only a convention center, but with our Civic Center, the way it's drafted right now, there'll be two different pieces that can be used to draw and combine and have some real excitement to go on with it. So,
thanks. Tom, when you were on the council, we had a number of discussions about the budget for the CVB. Have you learned anything more since being involved with the board now about what it's going to take to run one properly in terms of salary, operational expenses, and promotion and publicity? Or do you think we're in about the right place to begin an operation like this to build on?
I think that we made a decision early on that we really didn't want to do a set of budget in stone until we actually got a director here, because we wanted to have the director to have a lot of input into that budget. But as far as the base things, there's so many other communities that have done those. So I think we have a pretty good handle on what we think it will take. And the revenues that we're getting from the hotel motel tax, I think, will be sufficient, at least initially, for what we want to do. But as far as actually putting some real hard numbers together, we've been waiting because we want that director to be actively involved in the thing. And I think that's the consensus of the whole committee. I mean, they want that person to have a good feel for it, as something that they feel that they can live with.
From a policy standpoint, have you discussed how you're going to qualify people who are coming to seek funds as grants to seed events that we talked about? I believe we ended up with 10% of the funding would go towards designated events that could bring tourists into the community. Have you had any further discussions on that?
We have had the opportunity to put together an actual application at this point, and it's under review. We feel it's got most of the questions, criteria that we have listed, so that applicants can come in and basically explain their case. Why should I be the one, our committee, our event be one to receive the funding? And we tell them that it's mainly for the marketing. It's not the dollars to pay for salaries or other things, but it's to help promote their event. They have to go through and give us a detailed listing as to what their anticipation is as to how many people will they draw from out of town, how many beds will be occupied, how many bed nights if it's a 2 or 3 day event. And then we have the ability to go back and do a review after the event and check with the hotels if did they actually book this many, did that many people actually show up, and that's how we will score the events. We originally had talked about doing an annual and then semi-annual, and right now we're looking more at a quarterly review, and that way people have to get information to us in a timely manner. We'll have a date published just like with a deadline for applications for the next quarter. Then they can be reviewed and ranked and actually with numbers, so we're trying to put more objectivity instead of just the subjectivity into it. And then funds will be distributed and the evaluation will be completed, and hopefully we can see the actual impact that it's having by more people staying for combined events over a 2 or 3 day, a longer weekend situation there too.
Good, and I appreciate the importance of quantifying that, because that's going to be precious dollars that are going to be spent, and we really want it to go towards the events that will really enhance our community. Well, I know you have a wonderful committee. I know that you have been meeting quite a lot, and it seems like it's generated a lot of good ideas and a lot of enthusiasm. We really look forward to hearing about the hiring of a new executive director. I think it's a good time of year as well, because this is the time when people are really planning for next year's events and promoting next year's events. So it would be an ideal time to get that accomplished. So I thank you both for everything that you're doing and for the update. We really do appreciate it, and maybe we'll have you back on with your new director when they're in place.
That would be
so,
great.
great.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
All set.
Thanks. Next, we'll invite in 2 representatives of our Reservoir Development Committee. And we come on in. Sally Gavre and Frank Wintroub. Frank is one of the co-chairs of the committee. And as many of you know, we were very excited about the opening of our first public beach within the city limits, just about 4th of July, I believe. We opened just a day or 2 before 4th of July. Yep. And I want to talk a little bit about how the beach was put together, and the dollars that were spent. The money that was used came from our local option sales tax revenues, and I know we weren't able to do everything that we hoped we could do in the first year, but I think that the beach has been a big hit, and I know there was a lot of good efforts all around, volunteer that went into and planning that went into this. So I'd like Frank, if you could start and tell us a little bit about where we are with the beach right now and how it all came together. That's on.
So thanks for this opportunity, Ed, and we are finally very excited to have the beach really working and people getting a lot of use out of it. And I understand Sunday was the biggest usage day that we've had thus far. Which meant that there were apparently cars double parked in the parking lot and up and down B Street with people going over to the beach. So we have to evaluate whether we've actually made it big enough at this point, particularly since we haven't had any hot weather. The process started about 2 years ago when Ed, the mayor, appointed a committee to begin to plan for the recreational use of the reservoirs, because the reservoirs which have been traditionally used for water for the city were not going to be needed for water supply any longer. We had dug Jordan wells, which are deep wells, to provide water. And so the committee began to evaluate needs and sent out surveys in the ledger and in the water bill, and had things posted all over the city at the library and various other public buildings. And we took in about 8% of the surveys came back and gave us a long list of things that people were interested in, and hours and hours and hours of work to do to collate all the surveys, because they weren't done by computer, they were all done by hand. And what we learned was that the beach and trails and improved fishing and prairie preservation were really high priorities. So the committee chose to focus immediately on 4 areas and divide it up into subgroups, and then we proposed a budget for various activities. And the beach was the first thing that we felt was an important addition to the way the city had, for the city to have some additional resources for recreation. I guess we asked for around $40,000 out of the city's budget, and the city managed in a very tight year to find us $16,500, which was exciting for us, and we managed to figure out a way with some key suggestions by members of the committee about how we could actually get the beach developed and do a good job with it.
Gene Thorne.
Yeah, Gene Thorne, who probably most of the community knows as a Boy Scout leader and kind of a volunteer around town, did the engineering, and which was a significant contribution. And as did French Reniker, also volunteered a survey and a surveyor, and which saved the community about $750 and extended our ability to make the beach happen. And actually what ended up happening, the way we made up the shortfall in our budget, was we modified our plans, but mostly we were able to enlist the cooperation of volunteers and sort of get the community spirit rolling towards getting the beach created. And that made the project really extremely exciting. The city managed to use its resources to bring in the sand and save a great deal of money, because Glenn Shalongoski was able to get his crew to bring over 170 truckloads of sand over a 2-week period. And the water department managed to loan us equipment and manpower with Denny Langstrad to get us, to save a lot of money on spreading sand and moving sand and getting the beach area ready. And then we brought down the long sand slinger, which was this basically very large conveyor belt from Des Moines that has the ability to very carefully pinpoint where to put material. And we spent 2 days, and pretty much miraculously the beach was created out of that effort. And we were careful to put 2 feet of sand in the water all the way out. The beach is about 100 feet from shore to the outer, and then 80 feet north to south. So that's kind of the quick overview, I think.
Great, thank you. And I know it's been very popular, particularly with swimmers, but I think people really enjoy that opportunity. I think it's really enhanced the use of that park as well. And is there anything, Frank, I know we had talked about 2 stages of development for the beach. What would be the next stage of development for the beach?
Well, we had originally planned to do a rather elaborate retaining wall to handle drainage. And fortunately, I think one of the things that came out of having a reduced budget was that we had to modify our plan and sort of change the design and look of that area. And to be quite candid with you at this point, I think we're going to reevaluate those priorities as to what the next phase really will be. I think we're seeing things in usage that we didn't really anticipate. And the way the beach is now laid out turns out to be rather desirable, with half of it being grass and half of it being sand. And people seem to really appreciate that. Sally and a friend of hers who volunteered, who's a landscape architect, has made some suggestions about how to landscape to control the drainage, the water flow, so that we don't deteriorate the beach. And so we're not quite sure what's the next step. Maybe we make it bigger. Maybe we add a floating raft. Maybe we change the way the other facilities around the beach, changing rooms. Some of these things where we're going to actually need probably some more public input. But I do want to put in a plug for safety at the beach. Turns out in doing the study that we ran across some information. The bottom line on that is that a very high percentage, over 80% of fatalities that occur at beaches occur while the victim and generally children are being supervised, and often being supervised by their parents, which is pretty sobering. And so we want to encourage parents to be very conscientious when they take their kids, because once someone gets in trouble there in the water, you don't hear it, and there's no real way to tell. Basically, the Red Cross recommends that parents not read, not be chatting, not be listening to Walkman, not be eating their lunches, but be actually watching their children all the time. The beach is basically 3 feet deep for a long way. I don't know the exact number, so that someone that gets in trouble can bob up and down. At the very outside by the rope, it's 6 feet deep, and you can still bob up and down, but basically people should be very conscientious about watching for safety.
Right. Thank you, Frank, and I think that's a very important point, and I'm glad you're bringing that out, and I hope our signage out there reinforces what you're talking about as well, so people are constantly reminded. Sally, let me ask you, I know that there were some other planning involved, and I know your first love and your expertise is really in prairie and preservation. What elements of preservation are planned for that area and for some of the other reservoirs?
We're in the process of putting together a management plan, a resource management plan for not only the prairie, yes, that is my love, but there are also woodlands there, and water. So we are putting together a plan how to best preserve and maintain the prairie, the woodlands, and the water. The beach has been a wonderful way to bring people's attention to the water and the quality of water. Jack Eastman has been wonderful in helping enlist people into taking the Iowa water monitoring workshop that's offered through the DNR. And there are over a dozen people here in Fairfield who've actually volunteered to take that workshop. We've been trained in how to do testing for the water quality, different chemical tests and observation tests that you do. So there's a nice core of people who've taken that training. Woodlands is something I'm not all that familiar with, and we've been soliciting input from people who are much more familiar with that. Ray Lane has offered to play a key role in that as soon as we've determined what the objectives are. Why do we want woodlands? How do we foresee using the woodlands? So those are issues that we need to discuss, and then Ray said he'd be more than happy to sit down and actually write a management plan with us. We've been focusing on prairie management, which I don't consider myself an expert in prairie. I consider myself a definite enthusiast. I have no formal training in prairie. It's just something that I've become exposed to having moved to Iowa. I am from the Midwest, from Wisconsin, where there is also prairie. But I've taken it upon myself just to become more familiar with it and to educate myself, and mostly to network with the real experts who know about it. So again, we've been seeking input from different experts in terms of what's the best way to manage the prairie. But pretty much that boils down to burning. The value of burning a prairie to preserve the prairie is that it helps knock out woody species, shrubs that will invade a prairie. Nature took care of the prairie, as did the Indians. There's now evidence from scientists that the Native American Indians actually intentionally burned the prairie. It wasn't just wild lightning strikes that set the prairies on fire. They were intentionally burned by the Indians. So consequently, last spring, it was our intention to burn quite a few of the prairie remnants around all 3 reservoirs. And we found out it's a huge job. It takes a lot of people, a lot of manpower, a lot of volunteer hours. We had 33 people involved in 6 burns involving about 200 man-hours, having to borrow equipment from here and there. And we've pretty much just scratched the surface. We did a lot at Waterworks Park along B Street. That area, Ron Myers told us, hadn't been burned in 20 years, which is why there were a lot of smaller trees encroaching on the prairie and bushy species. So there are definite remnants all around Waterworks that we need to hope to burn this fall. We're going to conduct a burn school in the fall, 4-day burn school actually, and hope to do, there's specific prairie remnants around Reservoir 2 and a lot of brush cutting that needs to be done around Reservoir 2. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And then actually Walton has some significant prairie remnants that need burning too. So there may be some smoke appearing this fall around the 3 reservoirs.
Okay. Thank you. Just make sure it's during our burn season.
That's right.
We take a lot of heat for that.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. Sally, we're fortunate to have your enthusiasm, and Frank, your leadership. Thank you both very, very much for everything that you've contributed to that project, and we're very fortunate as a city to have those elements within our city limits for our public to enjoy in our public parks. So it's wonderful to see the development that's going on there, and I thank you for giving us an update, and especially congratulations on the opening of the beach. It was a great, great accomplishment. So at this time, we'll prepare ourselves for our live City Council meeting. And this evening on our agenda, we'll be discussing in our police report resolution and amending procedures on use of force. I think that could be an interesting issue for the council tonight. We'll also be approving a grant for the FAA regarding funding for our airport project. We'll be awarding contracts for the service road and grading and drainage, several other items as well. So I invite you to stay tuned until next month, first council meeting in September for our next edition of Inside Fairfield. I'm Mayor Ed Malloy, and I thank you for joining us this evening, and we'll see you at our council meeting.